and welcome to Analysis with me, Oliver Mcternan. The death of the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon over the weekend triggered days of mourning in Israel, celebrations in Palestine, and statements of condolences from around the world, but little international representation at his funeral. His death, coming after spending 8 years in a coma, has sparked renewed criticism and praise of his policies in office and during his time as a military leader. Although he has been out of political office since his stroke in 2006, it's still relevant to ask, to what extent does the Sharon legacy then define relationships between Israel and Palestine? And how does it affect the ongoing attempts at peace? Joining me to discuss this in the studio are Paul Usiskin, writer on Middle Eastern affairs, and Nasim Ahmed, researcher at the Palestinian Return Centre. And on the phone, we are joined by Dr Fady Abusidu, Fatah Foreign Relations Commission representative here in the UK, and by Skype from Israel, we are joined by Gideon Levy, a journalist for the Haaretz newspaper in Israel. But first, Sarah Sayeh has more to tell us.
Last Monday, the notorious former Israeli General and Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was given a state funeral. In attendance were dignitaries from around the world, including former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and long-term US friend Vice President Joe Biden. The controversial man was loathed by Arabs and a divisive figure within Israel, but has perhaps left his mark on the region as no other Israeli leader. Many Israelis saw him as a warrior, willing to do what was necessary to further the Zionist cause.
I'm sure that for a lot of people, this day is very emotional and also very controversial. Ariel Sharon was an incredible person. He did a lot of amazing things that very few people in the world can do.
However, to Arabs, he became known as the Butcher, overseeing some of the most notorious campaigns against them.
He's a leader of terrorism and crime. He committed massacre against the Palestinian people and the Arab. He committed the Sabra and Shatila massacre. He's a criminal, and with God willing, he goes to hell.
Whilst in the Israeli military, he had a long and significant career, where he led a decisive campaign in the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. Considered a skilled strategist, he was also known for being reckless and disobeying orders, often leading daring operations that cost innocent lives to bring victory on the battlefield. Eventually leaving the military for a career in politics, he was appointed defence minister in 1981 and went on to mastermind the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, which led to the massacre of between 800 and 2,000 refugees in the camps of Sabra and Shatila. This massacre, carried out by Lebanese Christian militias, which he was found indirectly responsible for, should have ended his career after it was recommended to him that he should never hold public office again. However, Sharon was to take office again when he was elected as the head of the Likud party in 1999 and was to continue to be controversial while in office. In what was considered by most an intentionally provocative mood, he visited Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in 2000, the third holiest place in Islam. The site, which is also considered holy by Jews, is in a part of Jerusalem that Israel claimed to have captured and annexed in the 1967 war, but which has never won international recognition. And the visit added to a series of escalating tensions, culminating in the Second Palestinian Uprising or Intifada. He was then elected to the position of Prime Minister in 2001 on a promise of security for Israel. He oversaw the construction of a separation barrier that runs between Israel and the West Bank, but also through parts of the West Bank, and today remains an enduring physical reminder to Palestinians of what Israel regards as its borders.
The wall in Bethlehem has had and continues to have a negative impact, as it does in all other Palestinian cities. In Bethlehem specifically, since its main lifeline is tourism, the wall has separated it from its twin city Jerusalem for the first time in history. Sharon today goes to his grave, but this wall is still here. We hope, wish and pray that the day will come when this big pest that surrounds Bethlehem and the other cities in Palestine will be uprooted.
Sharon was a strong advocate of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and during his time in office the number of settlements steadily increased. But in 2005, in a bold move that cost him support amongst some Israelis, he ordered the removal of settlers from the Gaza Strip when realising that their presence was no longer serving Israel's long-term strategic interests. Whether or not this controversial move would have cost him his political career, we will never know, as he suffered a massive stroke the following year whilst preparing for another election. This stroke put him into a coma for 8 years, from which he never regained consciousness.
Paul, the Sharon legacy.
Very contradictory, Oliver. Here is a man who, on the one hand, did the thing that people didn't expect of him, to remove settlements from occupied Israeli territory. On the other hand, here is a man whose hands are drenched in both Palestinian and Israeli blood and the blood of many of his other enemies. What do you expect when you have such contradictions? And I think the contradictions fit the character of Israel rather well. I think today it's a fair, and I admit, sweeping generalization to say that most Israelis understand the predicament they're facing if they don't reach a deal with the Palestinians. On the other hand, within Israeli DNA is the very powerful message that says we won't be bullied. And Ariel Sharon was a guy who would stop us being bullied.
Dr. Fady?
Hi, I think, can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Thank you. I think Ariel Sharon is one of the key characters during the course of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He influenced the course of the conflict on many key points, and even after his death, he continued to influence it. For example, during his funeral, which was attended by about 100 Israelis, excluding the foreign delegates, Mr. Biden and Mr. Tony Blair made some very high comments and appraisals of Mr. Ariel Sharon, to the extent that such comments triggered some harsher positions from the right-wing Israelis at the moment. So in a way, Ariel Sharon brought Israel into conflict with some Arab countries on certain points, was instrumental in some major confrontations, Lebanon, and so on and so on. He was vital in achieving success on the battlefield in so many occasions. He led Israel in negotiations, failed negotiations with the Palestinians, and after his death, his legacy continued to influence right-wing in Israel.
Gideon, to what extent do you think his legacy has shaped right-wing thinking in Israel?
There is no one Sharon's legacy, like there is not one Sharon. There is the early Sharon, most of his career, who was maybe the biggest teacher of Israel of using the language of military power, force, basing Israel only on its sword, conquering, killing, taking revenge, brutality. This was the first Sharon. And then came the second Sharon, who realized that military power has limits, that Israel cannot live on its sword forever, only on its sword, and that the American policy is also a consideration that should be taken into account. So the first legacy is the legacy that unfortunately Israel is carrying until today. The legacy that Israel is a militaristic regional superpower, basing almost everything on its aggressive capabilities, on its military capabilities. And the second legacy is, as I say, that to all this, there are also some limits.
Nasim, do you recognize the two Sharons?
Well, I think there's a clear cohesion, there's a progression, but I don't think there's a contradiction within the personality of Sharon. It's just an evolution of the same person. I think you'll get a lot of consensus in our discussion today. And Sharon's legacy, by and large, I think everyone will agree today, and within Israel as well, has been great for the Israeli right, but also disastrous for Palestinians, disastrous for peace in general. But I don't think there has been a contradiction. Sharon himself calls himself the warrior. His autobiography is the warrior. He's ultimately a military man, but we know for politics and diplomacy is only another form of war for someone who's coming from a military background. That's the way he sees politics. That's his logic. He sees every solution through military eyes. So even though he became a prime minister, for someone who was actually too extreme, too brutal, even for Menachem Begin, who's no dove, he was actually fired by him after the 1988 massacre in Sabra and Shatila. He went on to become the prime minister. This would never happen in another country. But his mindset, his thinking in terms of what he ought to do, what he should do, never really changed. He's the same person, but with a different methodology in pursuing his goals and aspiration for greater Israel. That's the way I see it.
Fady, to what extent would you say the Sharon legacy has framed the current talks, peace talks?
Palestinians perceive Sharon as the instrumental character for destroying the two-state solution. He put in place the mechanisms, obstacles, and encouraged settlement expansion during the 80s specifically. The process that ultimately undermined any and every effort to achieve two-state solution. The security barrier, the security wall in the West Bank, his efforts, the policy of intimidation that he practiced during the negotiation with Mahmoud Abbas while he was a prime minister, that was another way of undermining the progress towards the two-state solution. Today, what we are witnessing in terms of obstacles on the ground, expansion of settlements, roads in the West Bank, the disengagement and the internal conflict between the Palestinians that followed the withdrawal from Gaza, unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, are all consequences to actions that have been committed and planned by Ariel Sharon.
Paul, were you ever convinced that Sharon wanted peace with the Palestinians?
No.
Did you ever serve under him, by the way?
I didn't serve under him. I was very involved with the Geneva Accords, which was an independent initiative of a number of acting and former military people and politicians on both sides to create a shelf agreement, something that you could take off the shelf when you got to the point of real negotiations. And the feeling at the time when it was announced that he was going to withdraw the settlements from Gaza, added to by his advisor Dov Weissglass, the famous, we're putting all peace efforts into formaldehyde, told me and the others involved at that time that this was an act which wanted to state that Israel would act this way and would not have to act under pressure in terms of the kind of peace that other people talked about.
Gideon, I read recently that Sharon reversed that old saying, you know, that war is an extension of diplomacy. For him, diplomacy was an extension of war, and it was a cynical way of saying he wasn't really committed to a peace process. What would your view on that be?
There's nothing more contradictory than Sharon and peace. The man never believed in peace with the Palestinians, never believed in negotiating with the Palestinians. Even the disengagement from Gaza, it was done by him in a very arrogant, typical way, without asking the Palestinians, without negotiating with the Palestinians, without even informing them. And what do you need more? Because Israel missed an opportunity. He did the right thing then in the wrong way. Because this could have been a beginning, a start point for really some kind of agreement with the Palestinians. Would he really want to reach it? He could handle Gaza to the hands of the Palestinian Authority and show it as an achievement for the Palestinian Authority, would he really care about peace with the Palestinians? But this was his last concern.
But Gideon, don't you sometimes need, especially in Israel, someone who makes strong decisions? He was criticized on the Israeli side as well, and by his own party, Likud, for his decision to withdraw from Gaza.
Absolutely, and therefore my balance of Sharon's career is not only a negative one, and I was quite criticized here in Israel by so-called leftist circles for praising him too much, but I think that he created a precedent showing the Israelis that the settlements are not holy, and the settlements might be a very temporary phenomena, and settlements can be uprooted. All this did Sharon and no other Israeli leader, and only this, and only Sharon could have done it, because the other Israeli politicians, the current one, are far too cowards to do such dramatic steps, and also I'm not sure they mean to do those steps. So in this point of view, Sharon deserves a big credit, uprooting the settlements, creating a precedent, and showing mainly to the Israelis, not so much to the Palestinians, mainly to the Israelis, that even the settlements are there not to stay necessarily.
Fady, did his unilateral actions damage the Palestinian cause?
If you're referring to the withdrawal from Gaza, at that time I was part of the Arms Control and Regional Security negotiating team, and we were engaged in heavy discussions with regional and international parties vis-a-vis this foreseen and unconfirmed Israeli plan to withdraw from Gaza. And we put forward a very clear demand that a unilateral withdrawal from Gaza without any coordination with the Palestinian Authority and without reciprocation in the West Bank will have very severe negative implications. First, it will create an immediate vacuum. It will not be coordinated, and therefore the consequences impact.
Dr. Fady, on that point of creating that vacuum, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time for this part of the programme. I do hope you will join us for the second part and we can pick up on these issues. Thank you.